from the approaches to Krakow in the Battle of Limanovo-Wapanov in December 1914. The Russians had singularly failed to deliver the crushing blow against Germany that had been anticipated by many observers. It is difficult to measure the degree to which this caused disappointment in the Tsar's court. For years, senior officials had been abundantly aware of the tendency of officers at all levels to tell their superiors what they thought their superiors wanted to hear, and as a consequence, they had become accustomed to learning at a later date that matters were not as rosy as they had been initially told. On the evening of the first day of serious fighting at Stalyuponen in August 1914, Yuri Danilov, the Russian quartermaster general, commented, "Thus we saw on the first day of fighting the reopening of the old wound that had long poisoned the well-being of our army, a tendency to dissimulate facts. During the course of the war, this malady, never eliminated, repeatedly prevented us from seeing the situation clearly and correcting such errors in a timely manner as they were detected." Like all armies of the era, the KUK, Kaiserlich und Königlich, or Imperial and Royal Army of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was strongly imbued with the cult of offensive operations. The strongest proponent of mounting offensives at all costs was Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf, the Austro-Hungarian Chief of General Staff, whose long involvement in training within the army ensured that a large proportion of the officer corps was also inclined to disregard the importance of defense. As was the case elsewhere in Europe, this obsession with attacking in all circumstances and launching immediate counterattacks with whatever forces were available resulted in catastrophic casualties, with nearly 1 million Austro-Hungarian soldiers killed, wounded, taken prisoner, or succumbing to sickness in the fighting against Russia. The problem was exacerbated by Conrad's belief that the purpose of attacking was to destroy the enemy's army rather than to take strategic geographical objectives. On the occasions that gaps were discovered or created in Russian lines, the doctrine of the KUK army was to use these to attack the exposed flanks of the enemy battle line, rather than to make any attempt to exploit into the rear areas. As a consequence, most battles, even those where the Austro-Hungarian forces achieved an advantage, degenerated into bloody face-to-face slugging matches, as it was usually possible for the Russians to reinforce their exposed flanks quickly enough to prevent the attackers from making much of their temporary advantage. Outflanking operations would only have succeeded if attacking troops had been permitted to penetrate deeply enough to evade any defensive realignment. But the formations of the KUK army lacked both the speed and the doctrine to achieve this. While Conrad appreciated the importance of locating and exploiting weaknesses and exposed flanks, he also insisted that the troops assigned to face the main Russian positions should attack constantly in order to try to pin down the enemy. In the context of 1914, such attacks achieved little other than greatly increasing the number of soldiers killed or wounded. There was no attempt to use the repeatedly demonstrated advantages of defensive firepower to allow stronger forces to be gathered elsewhere for decisive attacks. Indeed, all the armies of Europe were slow to learn this lesson, even though more visionary observers had predicted such developments after analyzing earlier conflicts, such as the Anglo-Boer War and the Russo-Japanese War. Whilst Conrad and his generals had not really expected to win the war against Russia on their own, they had hoped that the Germans would join them in mounting a major offensive against the Russians in Poland at the outset of the war. But given that the German plan had always been for victory over France before turning east in strength, this was little more than wishful thinking, and the reality of the situation was that Conrad's armies were always likely to suffer major losses while they diverted as much of Russia's strength towards them